Welcome to Coleman Report Live, your go-to source for all things small business lending. My name is Katie Roach, and I will be your host today. Bob is having a great time on his vacation. I spoke to him briefly this morning, and he should be back on the show Monday. But until then, it's just you and I, Lance.
Yep, it's I'm proud for Bob. Some well-deserved time, and he's going to get pretty close to me, but not close enough. He's on Route 66, which runs through Oklahoma, but it skips Arkansas. So,
does it really?
Not going to get a chance.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to wrap up a busy week today with some SBA data on forgiveness process, how that's going, and we're also going to take a look at an OIG report on idle fraud, as well as, of course, go over our Fraud Friday that we always go over. But before we get into that, let's go through some of our polls. The first question is, what percentage of PPP loans have completed the forgiveness process?
Well, and I'm thinking, Katie, that's probably going to fall right in the middle.
Well, I think you and most of our audience is correct. The SBA published a report about a week ago now that said 55%. Now, of course, that might be slightly higher or slightly lower given lending activity this past week, but I imagine it's still right around that 55%.
Yeah, I've heard from a number of sources, about half of them. Most of what's not been forgiven are some of the new round 2 loans that were done, of course, and many of those, I was trying to think, a lot of those are still in the covered period. But right. I think you're going to see participant lenders, Katie, more aggressively pursue borrowers to submit for forgiveness when we hit that 24-week period.
Next question. Are lenders required to file a 1099 for Section 1112 payments? How'd our audience do, Lance?
They did good. The SBA is going to do this for us. So
that's nice. After a whole year of complicated guidance and things, this is definitely nice for lenders to not have to deal with that.
Well, and I think it's going to be quite an undertaking for the SBA to get these out, because if you think about the entire existing SBA portfolio, there are a lot of 1112 payments that were made.
Absolutely. And our last question, do you need to have a site visit on a delinquent PPP borrower?
This is kind of an interesting question, and it does have an answer.
It might have tripped up some people. What is it?
Well, we have not really gotten guidance as to the exact servicing requirements on PPP loans. The servicing is going to be, in the SBA provided some guidance. The servicing will fall under the SOP 5057-2 at this point. And I've not seen anything specific from SBA that says that you do or do not have to do a site visit on a delinquent PPP borrower. But if you follow the SOP 5057-2, it does indicate that you have to do a site visit on a delinquent loan that has been put into liquidation. And right now, until we hear differently, that would be the same with the PPP loan.
Yeah, I think currently any rules we don't know. The SBA has kind of indicated that we're going to stick with whatever's traditional 7A lending practices are going to be, unless the SBA, of course, comes out with more details on that later.
And I think the most important thing that we need to know from SBA is how do we submit for purchase demand on a PPP loan that has not been forgiven that goes delinquent.
Well, speaking of forgiveness, why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide? That's going to be looking at This is just a number of loans that have completed the forgiveness process, and how many, looking at the volume. I believe the SBA is mostly looking at 2020 PPP loans for this particular graph and for the following two graphs that we'll go over. Primarily because, like you said, Lance, I think some of them are still in their covered period, and so it would be kind of silly to start considering those in forgiveness numbers yet. But it is good numbers to see. We've got 2.9 million forgiven, 2.1 that have not yet been received. Is there a reason to hold off on applying for forgiveness, or should those people go ahead and start?
You know, at the end of 2020, I was a fan of waiting until 2021 to submit for forgiveness, because a lot of the potential tax implications were kind of up in the air at that time. We now know that PPP related items are not going to be taxed by the federal government. There are some states that are going to tax it. But there is absolutely no reason, when a borrower ends their covered period, properly spends the proceeds of the PPP loan, they need to go ahead and submit for forgiveness and get it over with.
Absolutely. I think that was just something a lot of people were sitting on, not quite sure what they should do. And I think we've even had this question a couple times on the PPP answer desk, and you've done a great job answering those questions. But there was that concern for a while of not being sure whether you needed to submit as soon as that's over, or if they needed to wait a little bit. There was question as to whether they were going to have some kind of blanket forgiveness that would have simplified that, but it does seem like that's not going to be the case, at least as of now. There's no legislation pending for that.
Well,
this is another slide. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, on the forgiveness process, if the borrowers, I mean, PPP loans were based on a payroll number times a multiplier. If the PPP borrowers spent their money on payroll, the forgiveness process should be simple. But as with many small businesses, they do other things. And there are other expense categories you can use the money on. But, you know, my brother got a PPP loan, Katie, and I told him, I said, just spend it all on payroll and then submit your payroll records. And it was a simple process for forgiveness.
Yeah, and kind of just along what you're saying, they're saying here that over 99% of the loan value has been forgiven on all these loans. So looking through, they've broken it out by different categories of under $100,000, $100,000 to 250, 250 to 1 million, over 1 million. And looking at that not forgiven amount, it's fairly insignificant in most of these. We've got less than $1 billion across each of those and across the total. So it does look like the vast majority of these loans are getting either fully forgiven or mostly forgiven, with maybe just a little bit left over. So it does look like people were taking your advice and they are spending that money on payroll or other eligible things. But I think if they spent on payroll, it's a lot easier in the long run when you finish that application.
Well, and the other thing, Katie, that, you know, I keep holding out, and you've heard me preach this over and over again, if SBA would just give blanket forgiveness on the 150 and under, it would really simplify the process. And, you know, this second round, they did a more substantial job of vetting all the applicants. So the fraud should be very, very minimal. And I think it's a possibility now. So as we see legislation potentially about SBA PPP, maybe at some point they will include that, but I don't know. It'd be great.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of discussion about it in Congress for a brief period of time, and it seems like it just never ended up in any of the final drafts of legislation. So unfortunately, that's just one of those things that a lot of the lenders and the lending community wanted to see that wasn't in there. But hopefully maybe in the future we'll have something that helps out, maybe something like a tax implication that could help or something like that. This is the slide on breaking down forgiveness by the type of lenders and if they've submitted forgiveness yet for their borrowers. It looks like in this case over half of the, or most lenders have submitted over half of their applications for forgiveness. And again, we're seeing a lot of that amount is forgiven. With just a few of these, there are some even that have a zero under the million, so it's less than $1 million in those cases. So it does look like a lot of lenders are on top of this and making sure their borrowers are filling out those applications, and the SBA is just slowly processing those.
Absolutely.
So this is an OIG report that I believe came out yesterday, and I've only had a few minutes to really go over it, but it's looking at EIDL fraud, specifically identity fraud, and looking at how that might pan out. Of course, we don't know the full extent of PPP or EIDL fraud right now, but based on some of the things that I've been reading from the SBA OIG, it does look like they're concerned that there may even be more fraud in the EIDL program than there is in the PPP program. From what they've seen so far in this report, they've had 846,611 EIDL applications that the SBA has referred to the OIG as potentially fraudulent. Of those applications, the SBA has only dispersed 112,196 of those loans. However, some of those did have advanced grants with them as well. So that is quite a number that they are concerned about. Among those, I believe there's about 15,000 loans that they are particularly concerned about being having false information that was identity fraud, people stealing other people's identity to submit these applications. So that is a concern. I believe maybe 2 weeks ago or so, we talked about a Fraud Friday where someone did this, where they took their mother-in-law's information and submitted it on their behalf without her knowing, to try to get one of these EIDL loans. And I believe he actually was successful in that. So that is a concern, and they're slowly finding more and more of those situations. So they do want to look into that. Of course, the OIG is saying in this report that they want to make sure that there's a process for handling these. They want a process for looking at these potentially fraudulent applications and these loans, and also a process for handling it if they do find there was identity fraud.
Well, the EIDL loan process, those numbers are pretty staggering, Katie. Almost 850,000 problem EIDL loans, and but SBA will get it vetted out. I hope a lot of that new money that went for enforcement goes to the Inspector General. They're going to need a lot of additional employees to process all these.
They are. I think they were even estimating probably for the next about 5 years or so, they're going to need extra employees to go through these, both EIDL and PPP, and probably some of their other grant applications as well, as soon as those get going. I know we've got the Restaurant Revitalization Program and the Shuttered Venue Grant Program. Both of those have just started, though, so we really don't know how fraud is affecting those, or if we've been able to get rid of fraud in 2021. Maybe it's not nearly as bad now that they're vetting a little bit stronger. So we'll be following those as well, but currently the SBA OIG is really concerned about these EIDL loans, and of course PPP as well. I believe we'll probably get another PPP report on fraud probably in the next 2 or 3 months to try to get a better idea of what's going on there. Going away from PPP fraud, though, we are looking at on Fraud Friday this week. We've got a woman who worked for a bank for numerous years, over a dozen years actually, who allegedly stole more than $1.7 million What she was doing was she was wiring money from client accounts into her co-conspirators' accounts, and they were laundering that money and sending it back to her. To hide this, she would take loans that were in the process of being paid off and extend the maturity dates on those, extend the payment dates so that it appeared as though they were continuing to pay it even if they paid it off. So then those funds appeared as though it was part of a loan payment and the bank wouldn't be concerned if it seemed to be missing. That was eventually discovered this last year when she took off for medical leave for a few days, and the bank discovered that there was a situation with one of the accounts where they expected payment to come in, and when they told the borrower that they were expecting this payment, the borrower says, no, I paid that off several years ago. When they discovered that, they found about a dozen loans that had similar situations, and she now, of course, is facing a much longer absence from work due to that.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good, Katie, when I was reading this article this morning. Took a leave of absence, and now it's going to get an extended leave of absence.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're just about done today, but here's our franchise and AICS reports, and we've also got our compensation report out as well. So if you need one of those, you can contact Joseph. He'll get you signed up for that, and you can get those right away. We've also got some upcoming Coleman webinars. And Lance, do you want to give a quick plug for some of these?
Well, I'm just going to, next week, we're going to talk about how to properly collateralize an SBA 7A loan in this environment. And I think it's very important to understand how to properly collateralize and have a compliant collateral package. So make sure and sign up for that. We're going to talk about servicing unforgiven PPP loans the week following that. And then, of course, one of my favorites, the restaurant industry series, will be that week after that. And someday, Katie, SBA 504 refi.
Yeah, that'll be a great program as soon as we all the details for it. I know we're still waiting on that, but at least hopefully we'll have several months of being able to use that program, because it will be great as soon as we know how to do those loans.
Absolutely.
Well, and with that, I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I'm going to be gone next week. I'm on vacation, but Bob will be back next week, and I'll see you the week after that.
All right.
Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend.